You are paying a nursery $50 for a fruit tree that produces 20 pounds of apples in its first real harvest. And then you watch that same tree struggle for years, producing less and less fruit while growing bigger and bigger branches. And eventually, one winter, a heavy snow comes and splits the main scaffold right down the middle. Because nobody taught you the one skill that separates a tree that feeds your family for 30 years from a tree that becomes firewood after 5. And that skill is winter pruning. And if you do not prune these 7 fruit trees in January, using the method that John Seymour taught to thousands of self-sufficient gardeners in England, you will spend the next decade buying fruit at the supermarket, while your backyard is full of massive, unproductive trees that look impressive but produce almost nothing. This is not about making your tree look pretty. This is about understanding the biology of how a fruit tree allocates energy between growth and fruiting. And if you get this wrong, the tree will choose growth every single time, because that is what trees do in nature. They grow tall and wide to compete for sunlight, and they produce just enough fruit to reproduce. But a wild apple tree in a forest produces maybe 50 apples per year, scattered across 30 feet of branches that you cannot reach, while the properly pruned apple tree in a backyard garden produces 200 apples per year on branches you can pick from the ground. And the only difference between these two trees is that one was pruned in late winter every year, using a method that redirects the tree's energy from making wood into making fruit. The real reason you prune fruit trees in January is to triple your harvest next summer. And this works because of something Seymour explained in his book that most modern gardening guides completely ignore, which is that winter pruning and summer pruning have opposite effects on a fruit tree. And if you do both at the right time and the right way, you can turn a mediocre tree into a fruit factory. Here's what Seymour says, and I'm quoting directly from page 100 of the New Self-Sufficient Gardener. There are 3 basic reasons for pruning trees. First, to remove damaged, diseased, and awkwardly placed branches. Second, to shape the tree for convenience of cultivation. And third, to increase the crop and improve its quality. And that third reason is what we are focused on today, because most backyard fruit trees are just unproductive. And the reason they are unproductive is that they are putting all their energy into growing new wood instead of producing fruit.
Tree 1 is the apple, and Seymour calls this far and away the most important hard fruit crop of temperate climates. And if you only have space for one fruit tree in your backyard, it should be an apple, because apples store well, they produce heavily, and they respond better to pruning than almost any other fruit tree. And here is how you prune an apple tree in January to triple your harvest. You start by cutting out any dead or unhealthy branches flush at the joints where they meet the main scaffold. And then you cut out any branches that are pointing inward toward the middle of the tree, because these branches will never get enough light to produce good fruit, and they create a crowded center that traps moisture and encourages disease. After you have removed the dead wood and the inward-pointing branches, you need to shape the scaffold. And the scaffold is the main structure of the tree formed by the leaders, which are the big branches that spring directly from the trunk. And Seymour says the best shape for a backyard apple tree is what he calls a Christmas tree-shaped scaffold, or pyramid. And the reason for this shape is that the short branches of a pyramid are less likely to break under the weight of fruit or snow or ice than the long spreading branches of an open-centered goblet shape. And to create this pyramid shape, you prune each leader back to an outward-pointing bud. And this is critical. You always cut to 1/4 of an inch above a bud that is pointing in the direction you want the new growth to go. If you want a branch to spread outward from the middle of the tree, you cut it down to an outward-pointing bud. And if you want to prevent the tree from spreading too wide, you cut it down to an upward-pointing bud. And this is how you control the shape of the tree year after year. And the timing of this pruning is absolutely critical. Seymour says this heavy pruning should be done in late winter, though never when the temperature is lower than 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -7 Celsius. Because if you prune when it is colder than that, the wounds will not heal properly, and you risk killing the branch or even the whole tree. Tree 2 is the pear, and pears are pruned almost exactly like apples, using the same pyramid scaffold and the same late winter timing. But pear trees tend to grow more vigorously than apple trees, which means they put even more energy into making wood and less into making fruit if you do not control them. So with pears, you need to be more aggressive with your winter pruning in the first few years to establish the scaffold shape. And then, once the tree reaches its adult size, which is usually after about 4 years, you restrict your winter pruning to a minimum. And this is a key principle that Seymour emphasizes. The more you prune a tree in winter, the faster it will grow. But a tree that is growing fast is not producing fruit. So once your pear tree has reached the size and shape you want, you switch to very light winter pruning and you rely on summer pruning to encourage fruiting.
Tree 3 is the plum.
And plums are stone fruits, which means they have a large pit in the center instead of a core with seeds like apples and pears. And stone fruits require a slightly different pruning approach because they are more susceptible to a disease called silverleaf, which enters through pruning cuts. So with plums, you want to do your pruning in late winter, just like apples and pears. But you need to paint the wounds immediately with a commercial tree paint or any oil-based paint to seal them against infection. And plums also tend to produce a lot of suckers, which are those long, straight, vigorous shoots that spring up from the base of the tree or from the main trunk. And these suckers will never bear fruit, so you need to cut them out flush at the joints every single winter, or they will take over the tree. Tree 4 is the cherry. And cherries are also stone fruits, so they need the same wound sealing treatment as plums. But cherries have an additional challenge, which is that they grow very tall very quickly. And a cherry tree that is allowed to grow to its natural height will put all its fruit at the top, where you cannot reach it. So with cherries, the winter pruning is focused on keeping the tree short by cutting back the main leaders every year to maintain a height of about 12 to 15 feet. And you also thin out the lateral branches to allow light into the center of the tree, because cherries need good air circulation to prevent fungal diseases.
Tree 5 is the peach. And peaches are the most delicate of the 7 trees we are discussing today. They are susceptible to a disease called peach leaf curl, and they require more careful pruning than apples or pears. But the reward for this extra care is that a well-pruned peach tree can produce an enormous crop of fruit. And the key with peaches is to prune them into an open-centered goblet shape rather than a pyramid, because peaches need maximum sunlight on every branch to ripen properly. So you remove the central leader entirely, and you encourage 3 or 4 main scaffold branches to spread outward. And then you prune the laterals back to about 6 inches every winter to encourage the formation of fruiting spurs. Tree 6 is the apricot, and apricots are pruned very similarly to peaches, using the same open-centered goblet shape and the same focus on maximizing sunlight. But apricots are even more cold sensitive than peaches, so you need to be very careful about the timing of your pruning. You want to wait until late winter when the worst of the cold weather has passed, but before the buds start to swell. And with apricots, you also need to be aggressive about removing any branches that show signs of disease, because apricots are prone to bacterial canker, which can kill a tree very quickly if it is not controlled. Tree 7 is the quince, and quinces are members of the Rosaceae family, just like apples and pears, and they are pruned using the same pyramid scaffold method. But quinces are much less vigorous than apples or pears, which means they require very light pruning. In fact, with quinces, you mostly just remove dead or diseased wood, and you do a little bit of shaping to maintain the pyramid form. And you avoid heavy pruning because quinces produce their fruit on the tips of the previous year's growth. So if you cut back the branches too hard, you will remove all the fruiting wood and you will get no crop. This is why you must prune in January, because these 7 fruit trees, apple, pear, plum, cherry, peach, apricot, quince, are all dormant in late winter. And when a tree is dormant, it can handle the stress of pruning without losing energy. And if you wait until spring, when the buds have started to swell, you will cut off the fruiting wood and you will lose your harvest. And if you prune in fall or early winter when it is too cold, the wounds will not heal and you risk disease or death of the branch. So January is the window. And if you miss it, you have to wait another year.
Now here is the part that triples your harvest, and this is what Seymour calls the science of pruning, which is understanding the difference between winter pruning and summer pruning and using both to control the tree's energy allocation. Winter pruning is done in late winter when the tree is dormant, and the purpose is to shape the tree and remove unwanted wood. But winter pruning encourages growth. The more you prune a tree in winter, the faster it will grow the following spring, because you are removing branches, and the tree responds by pushing out new shoots to replace what was lost. Summer pruning, on the other hand, is done in late summer, usually in the first week of August, and the purpose of summer pruning is completely different. Summer pruning consists of shortening the current year's growth, and what this does is it stops the tree from growing too fast or too big, and it redirects the tree's energy into producing fruit instead of wood. So here is the system that Seymour recommends. In late winter, you do your heavy structural pruning to establish the scaffold shape and remove dead or diseased wood. And then in late summer, you shorten all the branch leaders to 6 inches, cutting to outward pointing buds, and you shorten the laterals arising from the leaders to 3 inches, and you shorten any shoots emerging from the laterals to 1 inch. This summer pruning is what encourages earlier fruiting, and if you do this every year in combination with your winter pruning, you will see a dramatic increase in your harvest. And Seymour says that once a tree has reached its adult size, which is usually after about 4 years for standard trees, you should restrict your winter pruning to a minimum. And by minimum, I mean just 2 or 3 structural cuts per year to remove dead wood or branches that are crossing or rubbing. Because a mature tree that is pruned heavily in winter will put all its energy into growing and it will not produce fruit. So the pattern is heavy winter pruning for the first 4 years to establish the scaffold, and then light winter pruning plus aggressive summer pruning for the rest of the tree's life to maximize fruit production. Here is why this works. Imagine this tree's energy like water flowing through pipes. A fruit tree has a limited amount of energy from photosynthesis in the leaves, and the tree has to decide how to allocate that energy between 3 competing demands: growth, which means making new wood; maintenance, which means keeping the existing structure alive; and reproduction, which means making fruit. And in nature, the tree will always prioritize growth and maintenance over reproduction, because the tree's evolutionary goal is to get as big as possible so it can compete for sunlight and live as long as possible. But your goal as a gardener is the opposite. You want the tree to stay small and manageable, and you want it to put maximum energy into fruit production.
Winter pruning removes branches, which signals to the tree that it needs to grow more wood to replace what was lost. So the tree responds by pushing out vigorous new shoots in the spring. And these shoots are mostly vegetative growth. They are not producing fruit. They are just making more wood. But summer pruning is different. Summer pruning is done after the tree has already put out its new growth for the year. And when you shorten those shoots in late summer, the tree cannot respond by growing more because the growing season is almost over. So instead, the tree redirects that energy into forming fruiting spurs, which are the short, stubby branches that produce flowers and fruit. And this is how you triple your harvest. You use winter pruning to shape the tree and remove unwanted wood, and you use summer pruning to force the tree to produce fruiting spurs instead of vegetative growth. This is why Seymour says that pruning fruit trees is a science in itself, because you are not just cutting branches randomly, you are manipulating the tree's biology to achieve a specific outcome, and the timing is critical. If you prune too early in winter, when the temperature is below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, you risk killing the tree. And if you prune too late in spring, after the buds have started to swell, you will remove the fruiting wood and you will get no crop. And if you skip the summer pruning entirely, the tree will put all its energy into growth and you will get a giant tree with very little fruit.
The other thing that triples your harvest is the scaffold shape. And this is something that Seymour emphasizes throughout his book. The traditional open-centered goblet shape that most old gardening books recommend is actually not the best shape for backyard fruit trees, because the long, spreading branches of a goblet are prone to breaking under the weight of fruit. And when a branch breaks, you lose not just that year's crop, but also the fruiting spurs that would have produced fruit for years to come. So Seymour recommends the pyramid or spindle shape, which has short branches that are much stronger and less likely to break. And the pyramid shape also allows light to reach all parts of the tree, which improves fruit quality and reduces disease. Now here is the practical system. In January or February, when the temperature is above 20 degrees Fahrenheit and the tree is still dormant, you take your pruning saw and your pruners and you start with your apple, and you cut out all the deadwood and all the branches that are pointing inward toward the middle of the tree, flush at the joints. And then you step back and look at the scaffold and you identify the 3 or 4 main leaders that form the structure of the tree, and you prune each leader back to an outward pointing bud to create that pyramid shape. And you make sure every cut is 1/4 of an inch above the bud, and you paint the wounds if you are working with stone fruits like plums or cherries or peaches or apricots. Then you move to your pear and you do exactly the same thing, and then your plum and your cherry and your peach and your apricot and your quince. And the whole process takes maybe 2 hours if you have all 7 trees. And you do this every January for the first 4 years to establish the scaffold. And then in year 5, you switch to very light winter pruning. You just remove dead wood and maybe shorten a few branches that are getting too long. And you rely on summer pruning to control the tree's energy. Then in August, in the first week of August, you go back to each tree and you shorten all the branch leaders to 6 inches, and you shorten the laterals to 3 inches, and you shorten any shoots emerging from the laterals to 1 inch. And you do this every August for the rest of the tree's life. And this is the system that Seymour used on his farm in England and that thousands of self-sufficient gardeners have used to turn ordinary backyard fruit trees into highly productive systems. The result is that in year 5, after you have established the scaffold and switched to the summer pruning system, your apple tree that was producing 20 pounds of fruit in year 2 is now producing 60 pounds of fruit. and your pear tree has gone from 15 pounds to 45 pounds, and your plum tree has gone from 10 pounds to 30 pounds. And imagine this tree 5 years from now. The scaffold is strong, the branches are loaded with fruit, and you are picking apples from the ground instead of climbing a ladder to reach branches that are 30 feet in the air. And this is not an exaggeration. This is what happens when you understand the biology of fruit tree energy allocation, and you use winter pruning and summer pruning together to redirect that energy from wood production into fruit production. And this is why the title of this video says you will triple your harvest, because that is exactly what happens. Pruning is an annual practice. You prune every winter and you prune every summer. And you do this for the entire life of the tree, because a fruit tree left to its own devices will always revert to its natural growth pattern, which is to make wood and compete for sunlight. And your job as a gardener is to constantly redirect that energy into fruit production. The timing matters. The only time to do heavy structural pruning is late winter, when the temperature is above 20 degrees Fahrenheit and the tree is still dormant. And the only time to do summer pruning is late summer in the first week of August. And if you follow this timing, you will see a dramatic increase in your harvest. The system in one sentence: shape in winter, force fruit in summer. 7 fruit trees: apple, pear, plum, cherry, peach, apricot, quince. Winter pruning in January or February to establish the pyramid scaffold and remove dead wood. Summer pruning in August to shorten the current year's growth and encourage fruiting spurs. Heavy winter pruning for the first 4 years, and then light winter pruning plus aggressive summer pruning for the rest of the tree's life. And the result is that you triple your harvest. You go from 20 pounds of apples to 60 pounds, from 15 pounds of pears to 45 pounds, from 10 pounds of plums to 30 pounds. And you do this without buying any fertilizer or any sprays or any special equipment. You do it just by understanding the biology of how a fruit tree allocates energy and using pruning to redirect that energy from wood into fruit. This is what John Seymour taught. This is what thousands of self-sufficient gardeners in England used to feed their families for decades. And this is what you can start doing in January. And by next summer, you will see the difference. Your trees will be healthier, they will be easier to pick, and they will be producing 2 or 3 times as much fruit as they did before. And that fruit will be higher quality because the tree is putting its energy into fewer, larger fruits instead of many small fruits scattered across overgrown branches. Shape in winter, force fruit in summer. And this is how you turn a backyard fruit tree from a decorative plant into a serious food production system. And here's what most people do not understand. A tree that is well pruned does not need you every year. It produces on its own, it stays healthy, it carries its fruit without breaking. But a tree that is poorly pruned or never pruned will punish you forever. It will grow too big, it will produce too little, and eventually it will split under its own weight and you will lose decades of potential harvest in a single winter storm. You are not just pruning for next summer. You are building a legacy. You are creating a tree that will feed your family for 30 years, that will outlive you, that will produce fruit for your children and your grandchildren. And the difference between a tree that does this and a tree that becomes firewood after 5 years is what you do in January and what you do in August, every single year for the life of the tree.